Let's just go right into it. This is yet again another experimental podcast. We're going with the tentative name "Playing Over the Table," which is stopping in the middle of our our relative gamerdom and trying to figure out what the hell like any of this means by exploring various topics. I'm Arc the Ladder. This is King Phobos. I've stolen his intro time. I'm sure
King
that
Phobos.
yeah, I've fused him. No, it's like I fucked that up. So no. I've in fact, let's just stumble into it was intentional. Ah, that was intentional. Actually, do your own intro then. Why do I have to know things?
Well, I'm King Dolce, and
Phobos.
yeah, King Phobos.
Oh, God.
Well, how
I
does Phobos feel about this stealing
uh
his name?
I don't know. How do you feel about me fucking up your name? Let's just keep it
Well, I'm
loose
sure you're
then.
not the first, so I
It
really
won't
don't
be.
care.
It won't be the last. All right, but anyway, so we're gonna start off the new year. I know that last time in this sort of impromptu, off the cuff podcast, I wasn't really prepared, but now I want to spend this episode. We talked about it, and we're just gonna go into game humor. And having played a bunch of games recently, beat 'em ups mostly, and having talked about God Hand, that's why I've got
hmm
some footage playing in the background. But when is a reference funny, or I guess when are
Um,
video games self-referential and doing it in a way that isn't just complete nerdery? Yeah.
well, to me, never.
Or just
Because,
yeah, just go into that.
well, you typically references are just that references to different things, different video games, and the purpose is supposed to be funny, like the common knowledge of the developer or writer and the
Hmm.
player having this shared knowledge of a thing from the past is supposed to be funny in some way.
Hmm.
And typically I find that it isn't. Um I think one of the most annoying ones that I can never think of is uh how the line from Legend of Zelda where it's dangerous to go alone. I don't exactly remember the line verbatim, but it's too dangerous to go alone. Take this or some shit like that.
Yeah, that's it. It's
And
dangerous. It's dangerous to go alone. Use this.
yeah, and how many times have you heard that reiterated, referenced in video games and just kind of what am I looking at?
Oh, I would like I'm in the middle of that, and it's just like I kind of want to show where. Yeah, I'll explain it, but I think this is
Okay.
also good to have a. It's already winning comedy points. This is a it's a screenshot from Cyberpunk 2077. It's like the tweet says it all though. I seriously cannot get over how the Cyberpunk 2077 child models are just the normal civilian models shrunken down to look like kids.
Oh. Ugh. The
Ew,
fuck?
ew. He's staring into your soul. Look at that. What even is that? I just realized who is that like supposed to be a drone? It looks like an RC racer controller. I guess that's supposed to be like a drone controller. What
Mhm.
the? No, the line though to go back to that is
Yeah.
it's it's dangerous. The very way that you start off Zelda or any adventure is like now when they reference that is you go talk to an old man after walking into like a staircase or a room. I think the game does it automatically for you. And
Mhm.
that NPC, it's an old man, it's a sage, it's a literal sage in a robe or whatever. He tells you it's dangerous to go alone. Take this. I believe it's take this. Sometimes it's remembered as use this, and that's when you're given a wooden sword. That's what it is. So I'm guessing that the trope is that you're given a line and then a piece of equipment, usually crude and I guess of the starter variety. So that's where it comes from. But then it's like I would ask you, what games like can you think of a specific like game that does that at the moment? Like
Oh
what
god,
comes to
no.
mind? Yeah.
Usually no, I really can't because I usually shut it out of my mind,
Yeah, I got you.
but it's like you could probably think of some examples. I can't because I'm fucking drunk or whatever. But um, it's just the way it's used and rehashed is so lazy. This reference type of humor that you see a lot in video games. It, it's there's really nothing funny about it. It just supposes that one, you've played Legend of Zelda, and two, you know the line, and that it's in it of itself is funny, just referencing something,
No, yeah.
which to me isn't because it's not used in a clever way ever,
Mm-hmm.
and it's pretty lazy, like, and I don't know the word for it, but it's like the people who use this line, they know you're a gamer,
Mm-hmm.
so they're like, "How do you do, fellow gamers?
No,
Legend of
yeah.
Zelda," you know what I mean? And probably the worst part about it is that it's the very first line in Legend of Zelda, so it's the very first thing that you experience within seconds of playing the game. So it's not even a cool, super obscure reference that only some people would know. It's some shitty normie reference that everybody fucking knows, and that kind of adds to the annoyment it causes me.
No, I gotcha. Well, since I think there's a specific thing that comes up, I'm putting up footage of River City Ransom Underground. So I did take some footage myself of this game because one of the things that you mentioned that it was like when you and Phobos were playing through it, and it kind of confused me, but it was just like I guess references to programming. So there's like a
Mm,
wall here. I want to say like I'm inside a shop. It's like when you're walking through town. I'll get to like it's funny to start at this reference, but there's a specific point where you pass a wall, and the wall just says like C sharp or something. Say it's like nearby. Bonk.
mm.
Yeah, but I don't know. Like there we go. Object sharp rules. You do you know what object sharp is?
Um, no, do you?
Well, the only thing that pops up is just programming languages. So you have C sharp, I believe. Is it called that?
Yeah, there is a programming language called C sharp, C
C
sharp,
sharp. Yeah.
and it does have objects in it, so I guess it's object oriented, and it's all right. I wouldn't say it rules, but
Yeah. Well,
what a
Object Sharp is Premiere Cloud Native. Like, what the heck? So the fact that I'm looking this up or whatever, I think what bothered me, and I don't even, it's not as if I think it's trying to be like here. It's like, oh, I'm guessing at it, so I know that there's like a big wink. So maybe it's something that only like a programmer would recognize. But then
mm,
it's sort of I guess it kind of gets to the heart of the type of humor as well. Like it begins to affect the narrative, like it permeates into it. Because a lot of people are like, oh, narrative, that's like plot and writing. I'm like, no, it's the things that I'm staring at. Like this Beach Fuzz poster or whatnot, that's like the billboard. It's kind of
mhm.
innocuous. Like there's a iShop thing in the background next to it. But object sharp rules, like what kind of delinquent is spray painting that on there? So it begins to become something that you see because I think the big question, like, well, so what? These are jokes. The
Mhm.
like, let's keep going here. Like Carnita's Way, which is a play on Carlito's Way or whatever, which is I think that's a movie with what's his face, the John Leguizamo. I believe that he was in that movie. It's like an action sort of crime drama,
Mm.
crime action movie, if it's the one I'm remembering. But object sharp rules. So you begin to see like the self awareness. I know that this game narratively ultimately like the climax of it is that you're in a video game and then the characters there's one character that knows it, but the other characters don't. So I think what happens is that with this game, with River City Girls, you're being bombarded by, I guess, a game that can't help but remind you that all you're doing is playing a video game, and it's like, but we know that. But the thing is,
Mm.
it's doing it in not so subtle a way. One second. Uh, so I guess it's I guess that's what bothered me. Like that was why I even wanted to talk about the topic. It's because I kept playing like these games where they were really affected by Scott Pilgrim. And like I guess the big joke or the meme that comes up is like that I think explains this is Hayao Miyazaki saying anime was a mistake. But if you put into context that segment, he's talking about how nerds or otaku in Japan, but nerds for our sake, they only engage in nerdy things. And I think the irony is that we're sort of sitting here talking about video games and whatnot, but I think there is a unique way that you achieve sight gags, but maybe this is the same way where animation nerds will like go into the minutia of like keyframes, all that. They'll just show you a clip of animation. But what you end up taking for granted is the way that those like cartoons basically get conceptualized. So I think the end result for a lot of video game narratives is that at best you have something that is self-aware, but it executes itself at face value. Like I would say God Hand falls into that category. At worst, you run into games like River City Ransom Underground, the aforementioned River City Girls. You're playing something where its conceit is just that it's a video game, and it ends up digging or reaching into the bottom of the barrel. So I called it early 2000s webcomics. There's actually a video on YouTube where I believe it's H Bomber Guy. He's talking about, what was it? It was a webcomic where the guy, his girlfriend gets an abortion or whatever. Like, he goes into the history of that. What is it?
Oh, that.
Control-Alt-Delete, was it? I don't know. I think it's Control-Alt-Delete.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what the comic's name is or that particular strip's name is,
Okay.
but I can picture it in my mind.
I'm pretty sure it's that. Yeah, it's Control-Alt-Delete.
She has a miscarriage, I think, in the hospital, and he's running in trying to find out where she is, and that's the last panel.
That's
is
the last panel,
him
yeah.
consoling her.
Well, that particular video, he's criticizing how just nerdy video game webcomics of the first decade of 2000 were just spontaneously violent for no reason. Like that was where a lot of the humor comes from, and just being angry. And what made Control-Alt-Delete pretty funny in that sense, in that cringy panel, is that, and then it just abruptly has it's a non sequitur to basically have to ever imply that your narrative was building up to this, that people weren't just looking at a series of references like Family Guy or something, that actually all along I tricked you, here's this this abortion, or this joke about like, it wasn't a joke, but it's like, serious drama. And then the comic seems to sort of recede back into itself. So I think there's probably more to it than that. I think I might have misrepresented it, but it was just the idea that within that video, when I watched it and then I started playing like River City Girls, it wasn't immediately after, but it brought that video to mind. Because I think River City Girls is probably one of the most mean-spirited games I've ever played, where, ironically, in pointing out all the violence and whatnot, the game ends up presenting these characters where they're overage, or like they're adults talking about like underage teenagers, like sexual behavior. Like I think Misuzu, the bodyguard, there's the very first boss you run into, she says, "I've been in school for 7 years," which would mean that if, let's say when would you graduate, high school? I want to say you'd be 17 or 8. I was 17 in my junior year, and I wasn't held back, so you'd be like 18 or something. So she's 25. 20. Well, she said 7, so let's be generous here. 4 years. So she's been held for 3 extra years. So apparently she doesn't even go to the school that they're in. She's just the bodyguard. She's supposed to keep the students from being truant, like escaping,
Mhm.
which only really it like it on that only really works again as a video game. I've seen kids go truant and as early as intermediate school, so 7th or 8th grade. Like you just walk out. Now there would be adults that might sometimes catch you, but for the most part, I've seen people just get out of school. Like I saw them in class, and then you know towards the latter half, like after lunch or whatever, you might not see them like in I don't know English or whatever. Like it depends on where homeroom was for you. But to go back to the games or whatnot, Misuzu's an adult. He's effective of adult age. I don't know, like maturity wise, clearly she's not. But
Mhm.
she shows up, she breaks down a wall or whatever. In fact, let me just put that on screen. But she breaks down a wall. That's the first thing you see of her. And it's just her just sort of I guess
Bringing up
like
figure 1.
yeah, it's just her just being violent. Like that was the whole point of it. I thought I had that video up, but it's fine. Might be in a different window, but thankfully I have every other example I want. But when you first see her, it's exactly like that type of humor where the very first thing that happens is just a violent non sequitur. Like she's literally busting down a door or whatnot. I love being deaf. Here, there we go. So she's gonna break down the wall. Someone skipped that. Wow. I certainly found the right long play, which is the one where we skip like all the cutscenes. Oh, you nerds! It's not a long play if you skip the video. But yeah, it to me it just reeks of a early 2000s comic, like I said, which is that you you have a character that emerges, they start telling like oddly sexual jokes or whatever. Like
Mm.
I mean, there's a subtle self-awareness to like games and whatnot. When we played the game that inspired this one, no character there was self-aware. You saw a lot of video like characters playing games, I guess. I shouldn't say video games. Like Misuzu was playing pachinko in Neketsu Koha Kunio-kun,
Mhm.
Kunio-tachi, like that. The game that this is inspired by. So Misuzu was addicted to gambling, but she was like, the joke was that she was extremely masculine, but she's like, you scrawny runts couldn't hurt a fly. Like when you beat her or whatnot. So you know that they're going to fight. They get into the fight. We already know that she's been in school for 7 years. Like in fact, I'll just show that. But she's like, boys hate scrawny girls, something like that. Okay, this
Mhm.
yeah, boys hate scrawny little bugs. They want a woman with meat on her bones, and I got all the meat. So I don't know what's supposed to be empowering about this when she sort of I guess she's like propping it up or whatever, but she also just got her ass beat and she debases herself. I'm like,
Mhm.
oh, okay. But I think that, she doesn't have to be shamed or whatever. What creeps me out about her saying all the meat is actually what came prior to that, which is just like I think she says like I've been in school for 7 years or something like that. All right, but I'm trying to earn extra money. Right, it was prior to that. Like she basically just says like I'm big and dumb. The line will come up, but that's what sort of gets me about this, and a lot of it just you have to thank Scott Pilgrim for this.
Mm.
You don't even go to the school. I like did I miss the line? Like I've been in school for. Don't act like you're smarter than me. I've been in high school for 7 years. Ain't nobody smarter at school stuff than me, Suzu. So I don't even like. There are points in this game. Now I don't have to pull up the. I won't pull it up. I just want this for reference. There are points in this game where characters just behave in this sort of self-aware way, and I feel that simultaneously it just kind of points out the intelligence of the writer or just the designer. and that's what gets me about, I guess, anything that you see in this game. It's never the premise. It's not even like this game has an intro scene, like an intro cutscene, and
Hmm.
it's just complete bullshit. So like you have these girls and they're singing this song about their boyfriends or whatever. Like here, this is a lie. This whole intro is a fucking lie. And I know that people are like, oh, that's the joke that they're. And then when you explain it, you're like, oh, it's a video game and they're not real. I'm like, I could have told you that, but the same logic would extend to any movie. It would extend to any piece of fiction. Those things literally aren't real. That's why I even mentioned when we were talking, not even in a previous podcast, but we have a conversation. And I mentioned this French picture or painting, and it essentially amounted to a painting of something. And I'll just make up an example. Like here, we're looking at this. This is not a couple because they're not real. That's the point, that you're looking at something where art is creating this message for you, or you're supposed to interpret it, but it's not literally the thing that it's portraying. These
Mm.
aren't, it's a drawing. So here you see the boys get kidnapped, but by the end of this game, it's just like, oh, they didn't get kidnapped, they went to a spa. And it makes the entire narrative just a sort of insane conspiracy or whatnot. But I don't like, there are games like, things with conspiracies can be great, to create stuff, like to create art. We have action movies based on that. There are people where they're like, we have to police this out of existence, and it's like you could literally just say it's not real and leave it at that. But here you have if we're going to delineate this stuff, it's just the idea that as I'm playing this, the game immediately abandons just the conceit. You can go into how like that was the marketing movie that they used when they announced this game. It was just the intro, but it's just complete bullshit. And you run into people just saying like, "Oh yeah, it's meta." Like we're talking about how there's these references and whatnot. Well, in the case of this, someone would try to get galaxy brained with you and just be like, oh yeah, it's so aware, it's subverting your shut the fuck up, like subverting expectation. What you get
Well,
is it's this game where they talk about, oh, it's girl power to like have female yakuza, but then ultimately you're implying that girl power, if you won, it's funny because it's just like that's not, and maybe that was the point, but then it's like, why not just have something at face value where these girls beat up somebody rather than get shot and go to a hospital, that sort of thing. Anyway,
mm.
sorry about that.
Oh, well, it's just making me think like the whole gag of being self-aware and self-referential and stuff. It can be done in a funny way. I won't deny that, but when you think about it, there's nothing. You don't need to do any thinking to be self-referential and to like poke fun at yourself. You don't need no outside source of creative humor for that. You just say, "Oh, hey, I'm a video game character in a video game. Am I right?" And there's really nothing to it. It's just like referring to yourself from some sort of meta perspective, uh, trying to be funny and cute. But it's like any game could do that, really.
Yeah, like
With
no,
go
I,
ahead.
I I get it. Like, well, not to even cut it off, but it's more like I want to affirm what you just said, because I know I mentioned like Brian De Palma like to a bunch of friends. Someone at Chapo Trap House, I think it's like Will Menaker or whatever, he had a tweet, and he was talking about Brian De Palma, I believe, and it was like the movie was Femme Fatale. And there's all these shots where it would be similar to this, but the gag is actually to point out that it is fake. That what you're the Hideo Kojima, I think, does this as well. But in taking inspiration from this, it's that something becomes less of trying to it's like the humor you're describing and that we've been talking about so far is the equivalent of going, like preferencing like, or prefacing, or just even ending a statement with, you know what I mean.
Mhm.
So you've put nothing at risk, you're kind of fishing for agreement. So Brian De Palma has all these shots that he composes where he'll show a character being a voyeur in Femme Fatale. It was Antonio Banderas, and he like has a camera on somebody, and then Brian De Palma's playing around with like eroticism or even like homoeroticism or whatnot, and just gaze. So behind him is just a porno shop. like, I think I would do a disservice, but I'm gonna admit that I'm not much of a film person. I've watched films, I know that. I've tried to interpret them like by watching them. You know, that's what I went to school for. There's like theory for it. But what
Mhm.
really stood out to me was just this idea of constructing something that goes, this is fake, but there's a subtlety to it. It's that the visual language, there's also a quote about film, I believe this is from David Cronenberg, but he says that film has the ability to say the unspeakable. There's more to it, but I want to say that when you say the unspeakable, video games are, you know, they're just as visual at times. Like you're creating images, which is where I think there is a point where games can create humor based on, you know, player interaction and whatnot. It has nothing to do with like immersion or whatnot, because I want to get to the God Hand example, which is a very crude, raunchy joke. But to me, it's what elevates it above, and I'm going to play this clip now. It's what elevates it above stuff like this. The subtlety is what I think elevates it above this. Hopefully, this isn't too loud. I'm going to make sure, yeah, it's picking up desktop audio. So, otherwise, you'd have been muted and this would have been a sham. But let's go.
Would it be the first time?
Oh, don't do that. Oh, three hours. All right, all right, all right. That was a reference, by the way.
Sako, my feet hurt. Quit whining and
Yep.
keep fighting. How many floors have we gone down?
There's 3. She's gonna say 3. I think
Violent?
it's- yeah,
Nope.
there we go.
I mean, everyone's always punching and kicking each other. Like, you ever wonder why everyone in our town is so violent? Nope. I mean, everyone's always punching and kicking each other.
Nope.
Like, everywhere we go, all day
I
long.
mean, that was not
I
funny.
guess so. What's your point?
Nothing.
I guess the nope. You know, you have the straight. That's like a comedy thing where you have the straight man. But
Mhm.
the weird thing is that Kyoko is also kind of playing it straight. It's like she's having this sort of, I guess, oddly as existential kind of observation. It's like, why do we always fight? Blah blah blah. But then that's where I said it begins to permeate the narrative. Like look at the cops. Like they're fighting you. Never mind that they're assist. Like so, it's like, well, cops are crooked. But then it's like, why even have police or whatever? So what I thought was interesting about the game that we played, Neketsu Koha again, like the Super Nintendo game that this game is based on. The adults just
Mhm.
aren't there. Like the narrative also transforms, but to me, it allows this sort of. I don't even say to me, like it definitely allowed for a type of drama where you can focus on those characters. You know, for better or worse, like you can definitely say that that's where you're seeing fantasy in that game. But this game it's presenting you the fantasy, but then it's just sort of glibly kind of going like, well, what is this? But it doesn't have any conclusions to draw, and it's not really profound or insightful. I could have told you this was a video game by looking at the life bar. You ever wonder why we get hit and not get concussions?
And notice how all this self-referential humor is all conveyed through text or dialogue,
Mhm.
or the characters speaking about it. Never do they take the opportunity to be self-referential or say, "Hey, we're a video game," through some sort of mechanic or through the environment or something like that. Like, I don't know, just a shitty example off the top of my head. Well, I don't know, maybe it wouldn't, but like punching a vending machine and a burger pops out or some shit like that. Like
Yeah.
that there tells you, hey, you're playing a video game because you punched a vending machine and fucking soda or a burger came out of it. And there's no need for uh I'm sure this game, if that happened in this game, Kyoko or Masako would say, "Oh my god, a burger came out of a vending machine. How the fuck does that even work?" It, and you don't need that line. You don't need the character's observation of it being weird and being a video game to well try at this humor.
No, yeah. And it's like missed opportunity. But I guess there are times where when when I say games create their own flavor, it's that you already have on top of that, like when you look at something like meat on the ground or whatnot,
Mhm.
I can already tell you there's like a there could be a cultural thing going on there where when I watch Japanese anime, because this is like, it's like great. Now I'm like, you know, I've already committed to it. You ever watch like Dragon Ball Z or Dragon Ball or any other like shonen like young person anime where the person's just like stuffing their face with food? Food. The idea of food there is that it gives like stamina, that you do derive energy from it. But then there's always there's also something compressed in there. There's something where how in Mario, like I saw someone point this out. My friend Chris pointed it out to me. Some guy in a forum pointed it out to me like years later. It's just something where, like in Super Mario Brothers or in River City Ransom, to varying degrees, you get something that's sort of abstracted or compressed. So if Mario like jumps if he jumps on an enemy or he hits a brick or something and money comes out,
Mhm.
you could say that the fantasy is like, or the gameplay part, which is the fantasy, is like hitting those things or smushing them. The major thing that was pointed out is that Mario gets points for doing this, which means that this is like a high level kind of thing I want to say, but I feel like it's worth mentioning that because you get points for crushing a Goomba or something, that meant that you got something from that encounter. So someone said like Mario's mugging people or whatnot. If you shoot a fire flower at somebody like a in Mario, like in Super Mario Brothers 1, I believe, or 3, they turn into coins sometimes. So it's not literally that fire like has magic properties to give, money to you. It's that
Mhm.
when you take away the fantasy of, that cartoonish look to it, what's happening is that Mario has effectively mugged somebody, which I think is really fucking hilarious. Mario has mugged somebody and he gets money. And then, that's the sort of wanton violence. Like that's what you're looking at. So when people are kind of pointing out cringe or surrealist aspects of things like this, it's that eating food off of the ground just implies that, oh, we took a break at a diner or we went home. There's
Mhm.
this really abstract compression of time or whatever you're doing. And when we say that games create their own flavor, it's that even in the act of playing, like that's how the Mario example worked, that you shot the fire flower and the Goomba dynamically just turns, and it only happens because of gameplay. Like you know that about Mario because it's just something he can do. You don't have to do it the right way, it just will happen. So you can presumably on the way to saving the princess, Mario like mugs and he needs funds, he needs to stay alive, whatever. And there are some things games won't even depict, so it's not like a full version of reality in these I guess dynamic narratives or whatever.
Mhm.
It's not like portraying all of reality is the point. So when games like this are sort of trying to draw attention to that, they're not really doing so in any subtle way and they have no contributions to make of it. Like I think the fact that you get on a roller coaster and then the kids get life in Kunio, I felt like that
Yeah.
was significant because riding a roller coaster clearly wouldn't, heal your wounds or stop you from having like a broken jaw or something, which they would have had by that point, by the way, given how many times he got like punched in the face. But the fact that you get a life bar back or whatever, it's just like the statement that, okay, being a kid is good for them, you know, even though
And
you
isn't it
ride on a completely like unsafe roller coaster. What's up?
more fun for the player to ponder those ridiculous things and not the characters in the games to say, "Hey, why did our lives refill when we got on a roller coaster?" "Oh, I don't know, that's kinda weird, Kyoko. Why did they?"
No,
That's just,
exactly.
like, stupid.
Yeah.
It's more fun and enjoyable for the people witnessing the ridiculousness to ponder those things and try and make up some super harebrained explanation for it, and
Yeah.
the joy is just sucked out when when the characters in the game do it, and it's kind of like not beating the player over the head with it, but it's kind of just thinking that the player is stupid, that they wouldn't think about these questions. But then why would you if you're playing a game? You kind of accept that it's a game and you're not going to question why you're beating up a bunch of people. You just are. That's just your MO. So why would you think about it?
Yeah, like I've seen Hideo Kojima when I really thought about Metal Gear Solid 2, for instance. There are points in that game, which is why I would want to revisit this topic, but I feel like this is, keeping it simple is a good way to start. He constantly draws attention to the fact that's why I mentioned Brian De Palma, because Hideo Kojima has that style where he's constantly drawing attention to the fact that what you're doing isn't real. And characters, I think it's enough, it's that subtlety. Like, this is what I think you were getting at, that there's a point in Metal Gear Solid 1, for instance, where there's a character who is presumably in a base, safe, not on the mission. It's Dr. Naomi Hunter. And, and you've just been tortured. And she says, I'll give you a massage. And then she says, put the controller on your arm. So there's a way of making the player complicit, but also entertaining this idea that something or someone is manipulating Solid Snake. Like, that's his soul. Or, like, that's the supernatural. And the supernatural is a recurring theme in that game that I think people would overlook. But what I'm doing now is that I'm interpreting the game. It's evocative. What can I do with this? You ever wonder why we're so violent? No. All right. Like, it's like the way, say, Double Dragon Neon opens up, because that's the same studio, Way Forward. It's the same as this. And I think Conatus, who helped develop, or they were the creators, they did the Kickstarter for they were the people behind the Kickstarter for River City Ransom Underground. Their games are always full of like these kind of jokes that were sort of maligning. Double Dragon Neon opens up with Billy and Jimmy going, not this again. So Marion gets kidnapped or whatnot. So it just shows that like it's a regular thing that happens. But I don't really, like, when I thought about it, it's that when you take that and you spread it over the course of the game, because I don't think Double Dragon Neon is so offensive in that it tries to take that and then just have it be what you're looking at and experiencing the entire time for the entire game. But you start getting to these iterations on this idea, these things inspired by Scott Pilgrim. And I don't even think that was the point of Scott Pilgrim either, like the film, because there was a real criticism of like the relationship between like Scott and Ramona, that sort of thing, like the kind of person Scott was. And I don't even want to get into it. It's just this notion that this is what you're staring at, object sharp rules, puns, all that. Like, it becomes difficult to take something, or I wouldn't say difficult because it's disorienting, but rather difficult because why even give a shit? Like, most of the images you're going to see is like a text scrolling on the bottom where you know that the designer has pointed out some sort of conceit that they're criticizing in a very superficial way. Like, does anyone read this? Like, that's what it'll say on the bottom of the screen. I'm like, I don't know, person who decided to maintain scrolling text. Because they're saying, like, oh, the NES game is like that. And that's another reason why we're talking about references. Because the only reason that joke works is that you know that it's a reference to something. And it's a reference to a specific type of game or whatnot. But the only reason, like, you're pointing it out is to sort of lampoon it. But you don't see that stuff anymore. The whole reason it even existed at the time in River City Ransom or Downtown Neketsu Story is that they were limited by technology. You can't have voice acting in an NES game unless you're like the Paprium guys and you put like a bazillion custom chips into like an NES card or something. But there's no dialogue in that. So even games that have to use text, like when you were playing what is it? Mortis, what's the name of that game?
Oh, Faith.
Faith. When you're playing Faith, there's dialogue in that game at points. There's text as the constraints of, that artistic decision that the guy's making to have a visual adventure game. And you have text sort of scrolling or appearing. even in a game that has that, he does choose to have rotoscope cutscenes. He chooses to have like the father that's talking to the main character that shows up, Father Garcia, I believe his name is. Like, he talks. Like, he says, like, he reads the psalm that was used by Satan to tempt Christ or whatever, I believe on Mount Sinai. But no, like, you essentially have games where you take that idea of a reference, you scroll it across the game, and then as you're playing it, it's like, I want to like River City Girls, for instance, in terms of just little technical things like the pixel art, the fact that, you know, it's an action game, it's a beat 'em up, but it just sort of also, it's not funny, and then it sucks any kind of enjoyment out in terms of, like, you know, you're playing a game, so I think at some point, like, fun would enter the equation, and that's a real sort of nebulous or vague term. It's neither evocative nor is it fun. So it's just like this, the goal is just sort of mediocre, this like meticulously planned mediocre thing that has nothing to really say, but they have to constantly remind you that they at least thought about it at some point. And that's what, you know, you could make a criticism of like gender roles or blah, blah, blah. And that's why I was like bringing it up. But like when I say that, I want it to be clear. When I say that, it's that you could try to inject some kind of like fake academic pretense to all of this. You could try to mention that, but the reality is that when you play it and when you have to experience this as an action game, I think it fails because the framing is just completely cynical. I think that Something Awful post, this is a good time to mention, like there was a guy, Super Mecha Godzilla, that talked about Duke Nukem Forever, and he pointed out funny things about that game's dialogue, like how Duke loses his car and he says, oh, at least it had such good gas mileage. And he's like, that's not an 80s action movie line. That's the shit that your dad says when his Prius breaks down or something like that. So he pointed out that the characterization of Duke had not only changed, but that it's that of a pathetic middle-aged man that's like going through a midlife crisis. Because why would you point out the gas mileage? Like it's like, oh, that's my freaking car, like, you know, something like that. And that's what happens in the original Duke Nukem first-person shooter, not the Apogee platformers or whatever. But it's that Duke says, oh, these pigs are gonna pay for destroying my ride. That's an action movie line. So he sort of delineated those two things. And that dialogue, you could sort of see that the visuals in the game inform it or whatnot. It's sort of putting context to everything. So I think we can say that like these kind of jokes, like from River City Girls and whatnot, there's just an abandonment or a sort of cynicism to what it is they're doing. And to have to experience it and to see people kind of point out how awesome it is, I feel that there's a first principles thing going on there, or something where I immediately think, man, these people haven't played a lot of action games. Like this is your benchmark. It's just it's a game where you have these really flimsy mechanics. So mechanically, it's like doing things that I don't think are interesting, but at the very least, it could just sort of be fun to play through. And because the game is such a slog and mean-spirited, like a shitty 2000 webcomic, you know, early that first decade, that was why I brought it up. It's not fun to play through. Like by the time I think we were at like the halfway point, even I just wanted it to be over. And that was why that was why I was showing you that combo where you're doing those juggles, and I'll even pull it up now. It wasn't to be like this is how you should be playing the game. It's that when you stretch that over the course of a game, it gets exhausting. It's like, I don't want to do this shit anymore. So when we were playing the other game, Neketsu Koha or whatever, at the very least, it's sort of, I feel like it's engaging with two people because it's possible to fight dirty. But in this game, oh, look at that. And then this dude's like, this is a line from River City Ransom. Is this fun yet? like the original River City Ransom, it made me think initially when I played it that, you know, whoever had to do the dialogue, like, I wonder what it says in Japanese. And when I read Legends of Localization, they said it was mostly just played straight. So I'm like, man, whoever did the translation for this, they were not having a good time. Like, is this fun yet? Or whatever. I don't know. So it even makes me question, like, when I start seeing stuff like that, like things where I can tell that, or I may be wrong, but usually, like, I get a gut feeling that something was rewritten. I begin to even question, like, whether what I'm seeing is, like, if it comes from Japan, like, you question the localization. I know that there are examples where this happens, like, Working Designs, their RPGs. They took a lot of creative liberties with those games. And what happens is that it's just a shitty interpretation of something. I don't want to say whether it's right or not, you know, whether it's correct. I just want to say that when you're in the middle of things like that, it feels shitty. Because you're just questioning whether someone's viewpoint is worth a damn. So here, I'm doing this juggle. Like, when you're weak, you could sort of spread it across, like, this is the game. Like, the stronger you are, the briefer it is, but it's like, you can't, if I hit anything that you're hitting, it's bad. So when we were playing against this boss here, you and I were playing together, and if we both started hitting this guy at the same time, he would block and then punish us. So either of us helping the other out just doesn't happen in this game. And the reason it's like, well, we were talking about humor. When you combine the ability to collaborate, you know, and how, you know, we were playing the game that inspired this, Nekketsu Koha, Kunio-kun, on the Super Nintendo, that can offset a lot of shittiness in a game. Like, you can have a game with like, it's the same where someone said that not Band of Brothers, but Saving Private Ryan, it has a horrible message, like this person said. They're like, yeah, you know, it's very pro-war. It was part of the whole tapestry of, like, the Iraq War or whatever. But at the very least, they're like, but it's a good war movie. And by good war movie, they're like, it's well constructed. You know, it's got good action, like that sort of thing. Like, some of the messages in it are kind of dubious. What you're effectively doing, I think, with games like this is that the shitty humor also just sort of amplifies what I think are already frustrating limitations to me. So when, obviously this isn't a great example, but I'll just say that when we were fighting this person, and then I found that if you and I were hitting him at the same time, the fact that he would just recover and smack us, I'm like, there is no redeeming quality. So whenever someone's like, yeah, it's a great game, I'm like, well, if I'm playing it by myself, it's like the action is just, like, the whole story just makes me want to turn the game off. And it's not even great relative to other games that exist as well. There are many types of games like this that you could play. So if this is like your introduction to it, yeah, fine. But I think in the overall scope of action games, you know, you would have to actually not like games, or you'd have to just sort of acknowledge that, hey, I would have to pretend that no game has ever existed of this type, you know, to praise this game. And no one's admitting that. It's just sort of implicit to what they're saying. By no one, I just mean the people that are like, this game is great. It's the same folks that would talk about, like, say, Streets of Rage 4. You're not actually evaluating. It seems petty, but it isn't just to have this ongoing criticism. It's just to say that it's a very convenient example where, never mind how any other game used rank, never mind how any other game was like an action beat 'em up, be it a belt scroller or an open world game, never mind how they did anything. You know, in order to praise games like this and what they're doing, you would have to just be like, this is the first one I ever played, and everything I say about it just has to be oblivious to anything that it does, anything it's sort of doing. And that's what makes it so ironic to reference other games, to be like, this is so many games like this, or you ever wonder why we're so violent, blah blah blah. Like, there are tons of, like, overly masculine or, like, just super violent beat 'em ups or whatever. But I think the ridiculousness and their over the top aspects, they at least make them interesting to engage with. This shit is just like, it's just lame. Like, it can't even commit to its premise. It's just like, this is dumb and you're dumb for doing it. Like that sort of thing. So I kind of want I kind of want to just see like, if you don't have anything to add, I want to show like what I think good humor might be, or something that uses something other. I think it's unique to games. It's something like an example where what is good humor? Like if you guys are just complaining about references, then what is an example of something that's sort of unique to games? Like what is your counter? What is the negation to this sort of cynicism? Like visually, which put your money where your mouth is.
Yeah, I guess I don't know, like you were going into gameplay stuff a little bit, and that's kind of a different question.
Yeah.
All I can say, at least for River City Girls, is that the story and humor, quote unquote humor, it's very it's too tongue in cheek, and because of that, it just kind of turns me off to the narrative and all that that's going on, and it makes me appreciate Niketsu whatever the fuck more
Yeah.
because it was like a group of characters taking the whole situation seriously and not really questioning it and not breaking character. It was like watching a movie with actors, and despite how ridiculous it would get sometimes with like how overpowered that big lady is, or that we're beating up people in a school that's literally crumbling to the fucking ground.
Mhm.
Like they don't question it, they go along with it, and it's just kind of refreshing for because it seems like when people poke fun or notice something like, oh, why are we punching people all the time? It's like they're trying to be smart and cute, and it's just irksome because it's like not that smart of an observation.
I believe that there's like a forum or whatever, like Reddit like a subreddit, and it's like I am very smart. Like it's just someone trying to do that. But I guess like I know that it might seem like a different uh type of topic, but I feel that these kind of like the kind of dialogue you see often extends to the gameplay. Like even the gameplay itself is just pretty whack. Like the things that it asks you to do or whatnot. Like when I said it was mean spirited, think about how many fetch quests we had where it just made the girls look stupid. Like, oh, we don't know what opening like what a store's open or hours of business are. They're like, oh yeah,
Mhm.
like this guy on the roof here. You were told to go to the mall to see him, but the mall wasn't open. So someone would be like, yeah, the girls, they were in such tunnel vision that they forgot about hours of operation because they really wanted to save their boyfriends. But the ironic thing about that, or the thing that sort of contradicts it, is that Kyoko, when she sees the mall, the very first thing she wants to do is go shopping. So she's not even focused on the goal or whatever. Like her eyes aren't completely on the prize. There's no sense of urgency with her. But the thing is that it doesn't go anywhere because Misako is like very driven. Like she's very serious about whatever it is that she's doing, and that's why everything feels mean spirited, because is neither of the two are smart enough to just sort of go like, hey, this fetch quest is dumb. It's just like that observation about not this again, like is it like Double Dragon Neon style, or you ever wonder why we're so violent? They're insightful, but not really. Because the things that they could see, like existentially, they're not smart enough to see like very basic stuff. So there's like a
Mhm.
sort of anti-intelligence there, I'd say. Like there's just a lot of things where it it just comes off as really shitty because of the cynicism that involves the gameplay and it permeates the narrative and the story. Like gameplay is synonymous with narrative. Gameplay creates that. Like people smarter than me have said that. Or rather, those things aren't separate. Like some people would try to describe a game as like a cutscene, but then you just have the gameplay and those things are separate. Like no, 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 no. Just look at this game, for example. Like, I'm not just saying cutscenes are cynical. I'm saying the act of having to steal fucking security guard keys and then how it draws attention to like these stupid teenagers. That's how I substantiate that this scene at the very beginning never happened. That
Mm.
the boys just went to, instead of like seeing the cutscene or whatever, I think it was in a different video. But the promo video for this game or whatever is just a lie.
Well, it makes me wonder
Yeah.
if that was like uh like how the narrative and gameplay go hand in hand, was that actually clever design or just done by accident from uh inept creators all around and they just happened to line up?
I don't know, because what I'm about to show you, like, I guess I have a. My assertion is that you have various levels of competence, because it's the same with film. I would argue there are people that just, they do their thing. They're not really like John Carpenter says. He has no. I think he's a master of his craft. Like, he does things deliberately and whatnot.
Mhm.
So I feel like I'm looking at someone who knows what they're doing, but he has no pretense to it. But then you get guys like, you have people that really talk about their intent, and then you can just sort of dismantle it. Like, I feel like you could do the same here. Like, just think about the fact that that intention, which is what we're speaking about, someone would absolutely tell you, like, oh yeah, we meant to be subversive or blah blah blah. But were they even anticipating this stuff? Like, I'm not gonna ask them for their consent. Like, do you agree? Do you agree? I'm like, I don't give a fuck if they agree. That's what's there. Like, that's what's in the game. But then I can also say that the example that I'm about to show, it can only happen if someone knew about staging action.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Hold,
okay,
hold that thought. I'll be right back. One sec.
okay,
Shh, get down. Shh. Sorry.
that's fine. But let me know when you're back. This is where I would like completely cut the video on YouTube Studio. I guess I could just download it and edit it. See the live version. God no.
All right, sorry about that. My cat has a bad habit of trying to jump out my window.
Oh, that's fine. But that's also,
Oh,
wow, that's crazy. Well, this is the example I was going to use, but also I'll just give you time to get back here.
oh no, I'm back.
Or I guess I'm going to talk about something before I go straight into this, just to give you time to get reoriented as well. Or at least I feel that's important. So I want to say, just we're close to closing it out, I'd say. So here you have like dialogue from Street Fighter Alpha 3 where I thought it was pretty clever.
Mhm.
The first time I saw it, but it kind of touches on like that topic we were making about references and whatnot. So I guess I'll just ask you, what springs to mind? Because this is like I just have two things I want to finish covering. This is one of them, like two quotes. This is the first image. Why is he saying this? Like, why do you think he's saying this could happen to you again and again?
Is this a defeat quote or a win quote?
Well, Cody won, but let's just
Mm.
say that someone lost. But do you know where Cody's from? Do you know, like, what do you think?
Well, I know he's a prisoner, I believe. That's about all I know about him.
So this
Just remember.
yeah.
Yeah.
So this reference or whatever, Cody's from Final Fight. Do you know Final Fight?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So he's one of the main characters in Final Fight. So the way that this operates, I don't know what to make of it after everything that we've said, because it's like if I say that, oh, this is great or whatnot, there is the same type of humor that we were talking about, which is why I kind of wanted to touch on it. Even if I do like another video that's going to talk about Street Fighter Alpha 3 specifically, it's just this idea that when he's saying this could happen to you again and again, in the game that Cody's from, And even just reading it aloud, I think I can decide that I think it kind of sucks. But it relies on you knowing that Cody's from Final Fight and that assets are reused in beat 'em ups. So you know how you play Streets of Rage, or you could play like the games we were playing, like Neketsu Koha and whatnot, or even River City Girls. No matter how much you recolor or try to make them different, you're fighting the same people over the course of the game over and over and over. And that's what this is that's what this is a reference to. So he's like, this could happen to you again and again. It's that I guess he can turn you into an NPC enemy. Just beat the shit out of you over and over. Like he's just like warning you. Okay.
Well, that's not the message I got. I thought it was just saying like I could kick your ass again and again and again. But I guess that's kind of nice that you could enjoy this on 2 different levels. Like just take it at quote unquote face value that Cody's a badass and he'll just defeat you again and again, or the way you construe it with the reusing assets.
Yeah, because he also has a quote where he's like, with so much riding on my fist, this will not be my final fight. So it recurs, and if something's recurring in art, I think it makes it suggestive of like, if this could be like you said, if this is overdetermined, or if it's like just infused with like different ways of interpreting it, it's that those things are, it's all like, I think both things are true. Like there's no dichotomy there. It's just that it's tongue-in-cheek in that sense, but it's subtle. So I guess maybe this is better than a game that just completely surrenders any subtlety whatsoever. Then you have, I kind of want to pull out the super egregious one. What springs to mind when you see this?
Well, I love that face Dan is making.
Dan is a very funny character. Right.
I hate the art of fighting, but I want to see the king of fighters.
I want to be the king of fighters.
Oh, be the king of fighters. Wow, bro. Nice references.
So you know it's a reference, yeah. But it's also that Dan is kind of played for a loser, but I get the feeling if he does say something to this effect in the Japanese version, I would have to scour the win quotes, which I'm terrified to do. Because Japanese Street Fighter has numerous win quotes, and it's just like all that to just sort of suffuse of sort of just, oh god, just to get some meaning out of a fucking windscreen. But I do think that stuff like this is appealing to folks. But these are sort of tongue-in-cheek references as well. References. Like just the idea that I think that to some degree, at the very least, they're not cynical. Like if anything, I feel that Dan is supposed to be like that kind of joke, like he's sort of a diss, and I'm gonna do a video about him. So there's the plug, where I want to take this topic and just touch on specific things, but I think for the moment, just being able to sort of talk about these examples where, there's a sort of release there, because I think it's just really shitty to subject somebody to a game, or rather to be subjected to that stuff when I'm trying to like see what a game has to say, and I just find out that it doesn't give a shit, or that the design is just like someone thinking they're smart. So I want to just sort of finish up finally with this is what I was getting at. I have to turn the audio up, hopefully we don't go deaf, but this is something where I want to say that multiple things are happening, where there's an allusion to something, you can call it a reference, but it's also to the gameplay that it creates. So it's a sight gag, that's what we say. Like a sight gag would be something like in Man of Steel, that's the most immediate example I can think of.
Yeah.
Dude gets punched into like a construction site, and he gets hit into a sign that says, "We've been accident free for like 400 days." He hits it, and then the sign goes to 0. That's a sight gag. Like you're laughing, so it works. You didn't even have to see it; it just springs to mind. So with this, I'll need to explain it, because in an action game, things are moving so fast. This is why I think being good at something, like there is a visual or there's a mechanical language to stuff, to the type of humor we have. And the reason why I don't think it's separate is that, remember when I said like narrative and dialogue, with gameplay, those are synonymous? Well, in River City Girls, it's like it's making a correlation to the fact that you're just monotonously beating up everything for no reason. So it has to reference the fact that you're doing something, that you're playing something. So that's why I'm using this example. Now, I'll just play it, and then I'll explain it after. It's gonna have to be louder, but I wanted to make sure I didn't deafen you.
I can't hear anything, so
Oh, shit.
I
think
I
I
don't
oh
think
yeah,
I
I
need
can
to hear it, do
share.
I?
You do, but I definitely know how to fix that. I'll go to our conversation here.
Oh yeah, share the screen.
Yeah, go live.
I will say about the Dan thing, I think I like it more because, like you mentioned, one, it is subtle. It's not just in your face, and it's not something the character says out loud, and it's not something that pervades the whole video game. It's a win screen, which is what fraction of a fighting game? It's like a 1 second thing after every fight.
Yeah.
So it's not big in presence, so it doesn't like annoy you, but it's also cool because they're um a little more obscure of references. Like I know how we were shitting on references, so it's like, oh, now you like references, bro? What the fuck?
Yeah, that's why I brought it up.
But it's like references to other fighting games, and it's kind of smart and played for laughs, like Art of Fighting. But then it's like the title of the other game. It's not just reiterating something said from another video game, and it's kind of obscure, like how many people. What's the cross section of Street Fighter and Art of Fighting and Final Fight? It's clearly not everybody. So it's kind of nice, and it makes me think of oh, you showed me one time, I forget the character, but he was like a reference to he was in Alpha or 3, and he was a reference his moves were a reference to Street Fighter 1. I forget the dude's name, but he has like a
Oh, Adon. Yeah.
yes,
The
yeah.
kickboxer, yeah.
See, and that's not necessarily a funny reference, but it's cool to see like the inspiration of the old and like a nice kind of Easter egg for big fans of Street Fighter who were there from the beginning or went back and played the original games.
Well,
Those are
that's
nice.
yeah. Well, that's the irony though, because I'm like I recognize it because I played it, for instance. But I would never say I'm like a fan of Street Fighter 1. I just think it's interesting, but not to say that you were implying that. I just feel like what
Mhm.
we're talking about is like you're translating like Street Fighter 1 Adon into a game with modern mechanics and all that. And you can recognize that someone saw those ideas and they're like, well, if this character worked this way in this game, this is how they would like these would be their options. Like these would be their moves. So you
Mhm.
can the only point of that isn't to sort of obscure what you just said. It's I think your point is that you had said earlier, it feels like someone tried. And you can see
Yeah.
that effort in that translation where they didn't just go, this is stupid. Like they didn't just have to slap a bunch of text at the bottom and go, haha, who's reading this? It's that there was some thought put into what you were doing and like how the character would behave. That they didn't have to compromise what they were doing with something dumb. Which when you compare it with like River City Girls or River City Ransom Underground, when you're just constantly miserable and the only way to enjoy yourself is to be a fan, I think that
Mhm.
sucks. It's the same reason why I think we can say like, why would I bring up references if we just spent time like shitting on them? But like it's that you get into different topics where you have translating older things to new, you have interpreting those things, you have designing things where they're interesting. When you give up or you surrender on that, you get shitty games. Like you get games that really aren't funny, they're not evocative, they're not interesting. It's not that they necessarily have to be serious, but that we can draw a difference between like something that is funny and something that isn't, something that is at least interesting to look at or interesting to do. Like I'm not arguing that I think Alpha 3 is perfect, for instance. Like I've competed and it's really stressful on that level.
Mhm.
But I played it as, a kid. I was young when it came out and I had to play it by myself. And it was fun. Like I thought it was fun. And I feel that that's the difference. That not the fun platitude or whatever, but I mean that you can look at something and it just spurs your mind. Like it just like spurs your imagination or your thought. It draws attention to itself. Like that's what something being evocative is. That it it makes you want to interpret it because it is like evocative of meaning. It it means more than just someone trying to tell you something and then you just have to, you know. I think a good way of putting River City Girls like under the microscope and just sort of summarizing it is that it's like crypto cynicism. You have to punch through the bullshit of self-awareness to go, you guys didn't give a shit. And that's what makes it so annoying, because it's like, it's not even cryptic in an interesting way. It's very passive aggressive. It's very snarky. It's just shit. But let me get to this God Hand example, because we're approaching like hour 20. Like I think ending soon would be good, but this will be interesting. I hope. Hopefully we don't go deaf. Just let me know if the audio comes through or not. And I'm deaf, so that's amazing. Like how I'm gonna turn this down on this end, but let me know how the audio is.
Wanna go Brokeback Cowboy? Here I come! Quick and good! Quick and good! Quick and good! Wanna go Brokeback Cowboy? Here I come! Quick and good! Quick and good! Quick and good!
Oh yeah, I get what's happening. It's because I broadcasted it and I'm streaming. It's like causing my computer to freak out. Let me stop streaming. But I have to play it, and then I'll just have to relay the lines to you during the stream. But something that they say is that one of the lines is, "You ought to go for our back, cowboy." And when I said that these games sort of create a type of humor, not sort of, everything's working. So I didn't drop any frames. I'll try one more time. I have the video. I'll just close Chrome, like shitting itself. Now I'm guessing it's because I was streaming, but I have to try. So we'll go 30 frames per second. Alright. I think I can manipulate it now. Alright, so yeah, I start messing with the video. I can't you'll have to watch the stream, and I'll just hopefully stay silent. So you don't, or at least you don't have to hear me twice. But it's definitely crashing. This is one reason why I wanted to make a new computer. But the God Hand example, I'll have to stop streaming too. I think it stopped. Alright. But the God Hand example to me is about this raunchy joke where the player, you know how you said like, well, what if these things are just like, they just smash together like randomly? So I think a type of design is a sort of it's what you described. It's a designer anticipating or trying to lay out the game in such a way, like all the various components of it, pieces, so that through circumstance, because you can make it go wrong, but through circumstance, a desired outcome could happen. And I know I used Mega Man 8 as an example, but I don't want to go too far into it. Like, we can save that for another time. But in God Hand, what those components are is that you're fighting two men who are emasculating you. Like, and I know that some, like, whether it's transphobic or homophobic or whatnot, I believe it's transphobic. Like, if you need to touch on that. But what Gene does is he's fighting this guy. So first of all, you do the ball buster. Nothing happens to this guy because he doesn't have any balls left. So you're fighting two guys, and they're just basically dressed like showgirls. I guess I shouldn't say guys. Like you're fighting two women that look incredibly masculine because of the musculature and all that. But what ends up happening is that you have that sets the tone of the fight, that you're running away and you're trying to fight two people who, you know, I guess there was a specific movie I had in mind to say it, but it's just like a raping of a man or whatever. It's like it's very subconscious masculine fears that, you know, you're fighting two guys and that's gay or whatever. Like that's what it's trying to pitch it as. So that's the joke. And this move right here, I don't know where the stream is at, but hopefully you see it. They have a dive kick where they float in the air. So this guy is, hopefully you're seeing it, but this guy, Gold, I think is his name. He like floats in the air, I backflip, and I get hit. So the line, when I did the ball buster, the reason I recorded this was that he says, hold on. Now, I can't completely parse it, but I believe he's saying, ought to go for our back, cowboy. Which is basically like a double entendre. But I knew the sexual connotation, which was like, hey, you should like have anal sex or whatever.
Yeah.
But I don't know if he's saying wanna or oughta. I'm gonna try to listen one more time before I say it. I'm gonna invite the idea that I could be wrong about that line.
Wanna go Brokeback Cowboy?
I'm gonna say he said oughta. But either way, because we also mentioned that like this is something that you had said, you know, maybe like this is just circumstances coming together. Well, I think it's pretty deliberate circumstances is what I want to say. So I got hit doing a backflip. And what I find incredibly funny about that line now, as someone that's like playing the game, it's like, well, where does skill become interesting rather than get good? So the double entendre is this. The guy here is doing the same attack. I'm gonna run it slowly. So what I do is a side dodge. So instead of dodging backwards here against this attack, I do a side dodge. And in this game, if you side dodge, like at the right time, you end up behind them. So in a funny, like, do you see where I'm going with this? So what do you think I'm trying to point out?
Well, it's funny they use the like better go for the behind or whatever as like a play on sexuality, like a sexual joke, but in it they're also telling you how to beat the boss, which isn't like what you would think to gain from that voice line. You just think, oh, it's like a fucking joke or something, but secretly they're telling you how to counter this boss and actually get a hand on the battle, which is pretty fucking funny.
Yeah. And that was the point, because it's like, it's strategic value. You're getting it from people who are essentially like, again, they're emasculating you. Like, you were getting fucked up by these guys. Like, there's no right way to refer to them, because I know that the game is actually trying to present them as like men, but that's the whole. I'm just gonna say that I'm not gonna pitch myself as politically correct now. Fuck that. So I'm gonna get through this. You can flip backwards. That's why I was saying these things do, like, it's not perfect. That's why I kept this part of the video. You can backflip, but something to be said is that if you backflip too many times in God Hand, it starts being slower and moving, like, it doesn't move as far back. So if you spend time backflipping, you'll backflip into a corner. So that advice about ought to go for our back, you know, it's better to do the side dodge and either dash, or you can try to backflip again, but dashing will allow you to sort of escape the situation. So that's where I think that there's a subject of mechanical humor that I want to touch on in another video. It doesn't necessarily have to be like our podcast, but that's what I've been thinking about, where games have their own language, and it's that you can create these sight gags, that a designer can create this type of humor. It doesn't always have to be raunchy, but it has something to do with, I guess, the action of the game, and then like assets like dialogue and whatnot, the very visuals and whatnot. Everything comes together. It's like very synergistic. It's not a cutscene or a piece of dialogue and then like very like far later or whatever, and it all comes together. You could say that like there's this dialogue, But oftentimes they say ought to go for our back, cowboy, after they hit you with that move, which is what makes it so messed up. So they are delivering that sort of, quote advice. But the game doesn't say, like, there's no prompt that says, like, use a side dash to avoid this attack. Like, you would have to understand this as a sort of communication, a sort of language. And that's what makes it interesting, because I would say that this is not an outlier. That was the point of bringing up, like, Dan Hibiki and whatnot. But it's, to me, here, that's funny, even though there's a tongue-in-cheek play again. Like, there's this idea of a self-awareness, or there's a meta-textual aspect, or there's a meta-context to it.
Mm-hmm.
So we spent all this time, like, there's like an hour going into, like, stuff we don't like. But I want to say that that's a useful preface to this, because I think the whole delineation part is important, because there's nothing that again, it sort of reinforces what you said also. There's nothing you get from River City Girls' self-awareness or whatever. Like, there's nothing to really derive from that I think is particularly interesting. I already know that I think that the people that created it, they're very uncreative in certain ways. They're very talented in others, so I don't want to take that away, like the pixel art and all that. But where they err is in snark. Where they err is in this sort of, like, sarcastic glibness, and I think that doesn't do them any favors, because what they're pointing out isn't funny or interesting. But this game, I'm like, man, you have to be really quick on the draw to notice that. This game is relying on me to be good, and it gets to have its cake and eat it too. Like, if I get fucked up, still laugh at the situation. Like, these two guys are, like, Q&A, like, like, I would say that when I first played God Hand, I had to get really lucky, so I spent most of this fight, like, running around hoping things were in boxes and these guys are terrorizing me. And it wasn't until, like, I figured out how to play the game where the double entendre emerged, which was that, that was just the most mean-spirited, bad faith piece of advice. Why would an enemy just tell me, like, their weakness instead of, like, I hope you're too stupid to pick up on this anyway, and I'm having my fun, like, that sort of thing. So there's a real turn there. There's a dramatic turn. There's a comedic turn to all this, that being good at this game, matters in terms of creating that image. Now, I do think that limits who would understand it, but I think that's why God Hand is an interesting game. That it even pokes fun at the very idea of, like, being good. Like, I had mentioned that, because there's a video that I have of this fight, and I can pull it up because I don't need YouTube. I actually had the captures and whatnot. But there's a video where I'm doing it in the most skillful way possible, and I have the kick me sign on my back. I'll just hurry up and show it. So Gene walks in. He walks in. I think it has a shot of his back. That's from the front, but it'll go to his back. See that?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a sort of dimension, or, like, I know I mentioned, I don't like using the term, but I said over-determined. But what I will say is, like, there's a density to this image. That's something that I feel is more processable, less pretentious. When you look at it and then you start seeing these things, like, I don't want to say, I don't like the term deep, but that's more of a personal preference thing. So, but if you want to think of it that way, that works too. But the kick me sign, because I don't use, like, in this fight, I don't use, like, any god powers or whatever to win this fight. So it's just frantic. Like, it's me, like, having to actually know the fight. But it draws in the fact that, like, alright, I'm making this needlessly complicated by not using the god powers or whatever. And that's why I say that God Hand is kind of funny in that regard, because there are absolutely certain fights in this game where you will be utterly miserable because you're not using god powers. I wouldn't even say that this fight is one of them, but there's one where you fight a dominatrix named Shannon, and she is not interesting to fight. Like, she is not a fighter. Like, she uses magical girl powers. The game even presents her as a brat. And this goes into, again, like, I want to keep emphasizing that I'm not disregarding what you said. I think that there's something to it, where you have this kick me sign on your back, and it just so happens that there's a fight. So I view the game as separate from somebody. So Shinji Mikami just happened to put in a fucking character who, like, she's spoiled, she's annoying to listen to, she can turn you into a dog. If you decide to keep this on your back, you're gonna have, like, the most boring 10 or 15 minutes of your life. Because sometimes she just doesn't play ball. Like, it is not fun to fight her this way. So that's why I think that God Hand isn't even being like, oh, you're such a total badass. Like, its hard mode is saying, like, I hope you like feeling and looking like a loser in some spots. So it isn't to say that the sign, like, applies in every single instance, but that notion of, like, putting pieces into play and then having certain things just work out. That's where I think circumstance, you know, some people would say, like, oh, there was no intention of that, whatever. But I do think that it takes a sort of deliberate work to, like, put something like this in the game and then have that happen. And whether it's fun or not is beside the point. It's that, like, by having this on your back and you're fighting these guys, it makes the fight frantic, and I feel like it draws this question of why. And in some cases, you can own the sign, and in some cases, the sign owns you. And it says a lot about Gene, because I think Gene himself is a character where, like, the very way he gets that arm is by trying to look good in front of a girl and then just getting owned. Like, he gets his arm cut off or whatever. So I feel like this sort of stands in contrast to, like, what we had talked about. And that's where I would say that I want to talk about games like that and, you know, to go into them more in the future. But I feel like what we did, you know, for this past hour and a half or whatnot, that was a necessary starting point, because I think it has to be said, there is a difference. There's a difference between, like, the craft of God Hand and the craft of River City Girls. Like, River City Girls even tries to, you know, it tries to use terms like girl power, and I'm looking at a game like here, you know, if you want to call this transphobic in many aspects, it's not that I would even disagree. It's that at the very least, it's funny. Like, River City Girls does its damnedest to put pieces into play that imply that girls are stupid, that, like, women can't just save, like, two guys or whatever, that the act of wanting to do so makes you stupid. And I'm like, well, maybe girls can just rock. Like, maybe girls can dab. You know, maybe it doesn't have to be anything more than that. So someone can accuse me of, like, are you reading into this too much? But I'm not playing games that suck. And I'm not entertained by games that are mean or whatever. Ooh, this is mean. Like, no. This game is hilarious. Like, oh, you're such a badass. But I spent most of my time, like, playing this game at the beginning, not knowing what I was doing. So I was running away from two caricatures of, like, gay and or transgender men. And it just sort of played up the aspect that, like, oh, you know, it's a role reversal in that respect. It's like, you're not even good at the game, but then when you do become good at the game, you know, there's a different level of humor. So yeah, like, that was sort of the point. Like, what is the difference between what I just showed you, which I've only alluded to? It doesn't get any meaning until we talk about or we contrast it with certain things. It wasn't to dunk on games. That was never my goal. So I'm hoping that sort of ties it in. Like, well, what are we trying to do? And that is that I want to show stuff like that. That is a mechanical language. That stuff. Oh, the side dodge. Why not? I only got that by being good, and I think that's a rare instance where get good bro means something. It's not like, oh, I can do all these sick juggles. It's like, oh, that's a gay joke. That's homoeroticism or whatever. Or it's a very heteronormative joke. It's extremely, you know, there's an extremely funny thing about a guy just being like, I'm going to tell this guy to do something he clearly doesn't want to do and then keep owning him. I think that's funny.
Well, it's a lot more thoughtful than, hey, why are we just beating people up, bro? I mean, like, really, what's the deal with that? My God.
Seinfeld's never going to get old, man.
Yeah. If this were River City Girls, Gene would be like, wow, why am I, like, punching people all the time? Or like, wow, this hand's really strong. What would happen if I masturbated with it? Oh, ho, ho, ho.
You ever wonder why, like, enemies give bad advice? Like, I guess that's our future, like, decades down the line. You ever wonder why enemies, like, tell me stuff, but they know I don't want to do it? But no.
Yeah,
Okay.
A lot more thought goes into this than just questioning video games as a video game. That anybody can do that, really.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I guess this would be a good time to close out. So the things I want to say is, like, we're starting a new year. I'm hoping that I want to cover more action games on here, but also just keep it open to. I'd like to do follow-ups to the indie games that you and Phobos play. And by Phobos, I mean you because your name is King Phobos. But no, I fucked up your name. I want to close on reminding people that I fucked up my co-host name. But yeah, I'll be doing a video essay on Dan Hibiki, and it touches on what I just covered at the end here, which is a sort of mechanical humor. But at the same time, like, I know we just saw games like Cyberpunk. I had mentioned like Paprium and a bunch of other games, and you know, whatever topics that we all plan on bringing up, I just plan to keep it to, I guess, these action titles, and hopefully understanding, you know, things like skill and where I think it lays into design. Like Dark Souls is a game I want to talk about, and I know that you're playing that, so I kind of want to put that out because I know that you're playing through Dark Souls right now, and I try to catch it when I can, but we have the most horrible time zone difference I can imagine right now.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
do you?
well, it also...
Oh yeah.
Huh.
No, I was gonna ask, do you plan on restarting that?
Maybe. I don't know. I
Okay.
do plan to finish it. I don't know when. 2025 or something.
Some games are long. Like, it's funny that you mentioned that, because the irony with God Hands is I started it in 2005, and I would say that game took decades to come to any sort of fruition because I wasn't good at games back then. But even being good is sort of it's a Pyrrhic victory. That's a victory where you still, you know, you still incur like a loss. Like, it wasn't worth it, is in a lot of respects. So I'm still, the jury's out on that one. So I'm just pointing that out because I understand what you mean about Dark Souls, because this game was my Dark Souls. There's a reference for you.
Yeah. So yeah, that's it. Talking about video games in a nutshell. So if you like that, be sure to like, favorite, subscribe, share, rate 5 stars, dab on that like button, and
Play River
yeah.
City Girls. Oh wait, no. Yeah, just there'll be more to come over the course of the year. Hoping to do these twice a week, or not twice a week, but twice a month. But hopefully they manage to get better with time. But yeah, I think we'll leave it at that. Thanks for watching.
Peace out.